She traveled 2,000 miles with nothing but hope in her heart and a faded photograph in her pocket. What she found at the end of that railroad track would shatter everything she believed about love, mercy, and second chances. Elena Martinez had crossed half a continent to marry a man she'd never met, carrying 17 letters that promised her a new life and a loving husband. But when the dust settled at Silver Creek Station, she discovered that sometimes the worst rejections lead to the most beautiful beginnings. The year was 1887, and the American frontier was still a place where desperate souls could reinvent themselves, where second chances grew wild as prairie grass. Elena had left behind everything: a childhood home filled with memories, a community that whispered about her uncertain future, and the suffocating certainty that she'd end up forgotten and alone. For 8 months, she'd exchanged letters with Thomas Mitchell, each envelope bringing promises of prosperity, protection, and love. She'd sold her mother's jewelry to pay for the train ticket and boarded that westbound train with absolute faith that her story was finally beginning. But sometimes the most devastating rejections become doorways to extraordinary love stories. This is the story of a woman who learned that worth isn't measured by who wants you, but by who sees your true value when you're broken. Sometimes the person meant to save you isn't the one you came looking for. The train wheezed to a stop at Silver Creek Station like an old man catching his breath after a long climb. Steam hissed from beneath the iron beast, and dust swirled in lazy circles around the wooden platform. Elena Martinez pressed her face to the window, her heart hammering as she caught her first glimpse of what was supposed to be her new home. Silver Creek looked exactly like the frontier towns she'd imagined. Weathered buildings lined a wide dirt street, horses tied to hitching posts, men in worn hats moving with unhurried purpose. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the platform, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Elena smoothed her best dress, a modest blue cotton number with pearl buttons that had belonged to her mother, and checked her reflection in the window glass. Her dark hair was still neat despite the 3-day journey, pinned back in the style she hoped would please Thomas Mitchell. In her small leather satchel, she carried everything she owned: 2 changes of clothes, her mother's rosary, and 17 precious letters. Those letters had been her lifeline these past 8 months. When Papa died and left her with nothing but debts, when the other girls in town whispered that Elena Martinez would end up working in the saloons, those letters had offered hope. Thomas Mitchell wrote of his successful ranch, his need for a good woman, and his promise that she'd never want for anything again. "Silver Creek Station," the conductor called. Elena gathered her courage and stepped off the train. The platform bustled with activity: cowboys heading back to ranches, drummers with sample cases, families saying goodbyes. But nowhere among the faces did she see the man from the photograph Thomas had sent. She stood beside her small trunk, searching the crowd. According to his last letter, Thomas was supposed to meet her at exactly 3:15. She pulled out her father's pocket watch. 3:20. "Miss Martinez?" Elena turned, relief flooding through her. A man approached, tall and well-dressed in a black suit and bowler hat. But even as she smiled, something felt wrong. This wasn't the face from the photograph. "Yes, I'm Elena Martinez." The man tipped his hat, but his expression was cold. "I'm Henry Caldwell, Mr. Mitchell's attorney. I'm afraid there's been a change of plans." Elena's stomach dropped. "A change? Is Thomas ill?" Caldwell reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "Mr. Mitchell has reconsidered the arrangement. Upon reflection, he's decided that a mail-order marriage would not suit his current situation." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "I don't understand. What do you mean, reconsidered?" "He's called off the engagement, Miss Martinez. The arrangement is terminated." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Around her, the normal sounds of the station continued, but everything seemed muffled, distant. "But I've traveled so far. I sold everything. The letters—" "Mr. Mitchell understands this may be disappointing," Caldwell continued, his tone suggesting he understood nothing of the sort. "However, he's prepared to provide return passage to San Antonio, plus a small sum for your inconvenience." He held out an envelope. Elena stared at it without moving. "I have nowhere to go back to," she whispered. Caldwell's expression didn't change. That's not Mr. Mitchell's concern, I'm afraid. The eastbound train leaves at 6 o'clock. I suggest you be on it." With that, he placed the envelope on top of her trunk and walked away, leaving Elena standing alone as her entire future crumbled around her. For a long moment, she couldn't move. The other passengers flowed around her like water around a stone, all with places to go, people waiting. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It was beautiful, this land she'd dreamed of making her home, and now she'd never be part of it. Elena picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a train ticket and $50, more money than she'd ever held at once, but somehow it felt like nothing at all. $50 to rebuild a life that had been 3 years in the planning. She thought about Thomas Mitchell's letters, stored carefully in her satchel. All those promises about partnership, about building something together. Had any of it been real? Or had she been nothing more than a romantic notion? Something that looked better on paper than in person? The train whistle blew, a long, mournful sound that seemed to echo Elena's heartbreak. 6 o'clock was still hours away, but she could already feel herself being pulled back toward a life that no longer existed. She picked up her trunk and began walking toward the station house. Maybe there was a place she could sit and think, figure out what came next. The money would get her back to San Antonio, but then what? Papa's debts were still waiting. The station house was simple. Wooden benches along the walls and a pot-bellied stove in the center. A few other travelers waited inside. An elderly woman knitting, a man reading a newspaper, a mother with 2 small children. Normal people living normal lives, all confident in their destinations. Elena sat down heavily near the window, setting her trunk beside her. Through the glass, she could see Silver Creek's main street bustling with early evening activity. Women in crisp calico dresses selected fabric at the general store. Men gathered outside the saloon, discussing cattle prices and weather. This could have been her life. She could have been one of those women, walking arm in arm with her husband after a day of setting up house. Instead, she was a spectator, watching other people's happiness from behind a window. "You look like someone carrying the weight of the world." Elena looked up, startled. A woman about her own age had approached. Blonde hair, kind eyes, wearing a simple brown dress that marked her as one of the town's working folk. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stare," Elena said. The woman smiled and sat down uninvited. "Honey, in a town this size, we all stare. I'm Mary Jenkins. My husband runs the hardware store." "Elena Martinez." "You're the mail-order bride," Mary said, not unkindly. "Word travels fast around here. I heard about what happened with Mitchell." Elena's cheeks burned. "Does everyone know?" "Mitchell's lawyer isn't exactly subtle. Plus, Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house has ears like a hawk." Mary's expression softened. "I'm sorry, hun. That's a hard way to start over." Elena looked down at her hands. "I'm not starting over. I'm going back." "Back to what?" The simple question hit Elena harder than expected. Back to what, indeed? Back to an empty house she couldn't afford? Back to a community that had already written her off? Back to the kind of desperate poverty that had driven her to answer a stranger's advertisement? "I don't know," she admitted. Mary was quiet for a moment, studying Elena's face. "You know, there might be another option." Elena looked up hopefully. "Mrs. Henderson's getting on in years and she's been looking for help at the boarding house. Room and board plus a small wage. It's not much, but it's honest work." Why would she help a stranger? Because sometimes that's what good people do. Mary stood up. "Think about it. The offer for the return ticket will still be good tomorrow." After Mary left, Elena sat alone as darkness crept across the sky. One by one, the other travelers departed. Soon only Elena remained, accompanied by the ticket agent who occasionally glanced at her with poorly concealed curiosity. She pulled out Thomas Mitchell's letters and spread them across her lap. In the lamplight, his careful handwriting looked different somehow, more calculated than romantic. Had she been foolish to believe in words written by a man who'd never seen her face, never heard her laugh? The door creaked open, bringing a gust of cool evening air and approaching footsteps. Elena looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a cowboy's hat and long coat. For a moment her heart leaped. Could it be Thomas come to apologize? But as the man stepped into the lamplight, Elena saw this wasn't Thomas Mitchell. This man was younger, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He carried himself with easy confidence, and when he removed his hat, revealing dark hair tousled from wind, Elena felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of someone born to this country. "I don't mean to intrude, but I noticed you've been sitting here for quite a spell. Everything all right?" Elena felt her cheeks warm. "I'm fine, thank you." The stranger studied her face, and Elena had the unsettling feeling he could see right through her polite deflection. "Name's Jake Morrison. I run cattle just outside of town, and you don't look fine, if you don't mind me saying so." "Elena Martinez," she replied automatically, then wondered why she'd given her name to a complete stranger. Jake's expression shifted slightly. "You're the lady who came in on the afternoon train, the one Mitchell was supposed to—" He trailed off, understanding dawning. "Ah, hell, I'm sorry." Elena looked down. Word travels fast in a small town. "It does." Jake was quiet, then said, "Mind if I sit? These old bones aren't as young as they used to be." Despite herself, Elena almost smiled. Jake Morrison didn't look a day over 30. "Of course." He settled onto the bench across from her, his presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. "So what's your plan now?" Elena gestured to the envelope. "I suppose I go back where I came from. That what you want to do?" The directness caught Elena off guard. She'd been so focused on what she should do that she hadn't considered what she wanted. "I don't know." Jake nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. "Silver Creek's not a bad place to not know things. Folks here tend to give a person space to figure themselves out." "Mrs. Jenkins mentioned that Mrs. Henderson might need help." "Mary Jenkins has a good heart, and Widow Henderson could use the help." He paused. "Sometimes the things that seem like endings are really just beginnings in disguise." There was something in his tone that made Elena think he spoke from experience. "You sound like someone who's had a few false starts himself." Jake's smile was rueful. "A few. Went to California during the gold rush. Spent 2 years breaking my back for nothing but sore muscles and empty pockets. Came back thinking I was a failure, only to discover that what I'd been looking for was right here all along." "And what was that?" "Home," he said simply. "Turns out it wasn't a place I needed to find. It was a feeling I needed to recognize." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of panic that had been choking her since Caldwell's news. "Do you think people can really start over?" "I think people can become who they were always meant to be. Sometimes it just takes getting lost first to find the right path." They sat in comfortable silence, the quiet broken only by distant sounds of the town settling for night. Elena found herself studying Jake's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the gentle strength in his hands. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked suddenly. "You don't even know me." Jake turned to meet her gaze. "Maybe because I know what it's like to feel like the world shifted under your feet, and maybe because kindness doesn't require a reason." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. Not bitter tears of disappointment, but something warmer, more hopeful. "I should go find Mrs. Henderson. I could walk you over there if you'd like. It's getting dark, and you don't know the town." Elena hesitated. In San Antonio, accepting such an offer would have been scandalous, but something about Jake Morrison felt safe. "I'd appreciate that." As they gathered her belongings and stepped into the crisp Montana evening, Elena realized that for the first time since stepping off the train, she wasn't thinking about Thomas Mitchell. Instead, she was thinking about storm-gray eyes and gentle voices, about the possibility that maybe her story wasn't over after all. The walk took them down Silver Creek's main street, past the general store and church, past houses with warm yellow light spilling from windows. Jake pointed out landmarks, the doctor's office, the school, the small library. "It's a good community," he said as they paused in front of a 2-story white house with a sign reading Henderson's boarding house. "Folks look out for each other here." Elena looked up at the house, noting neat curtains and a well-tended garden. It looked like the kind of place where a person could heal, could find their footing again. "Thank you," she said, turning to Jake. "For everything." Some things you have to do not because anyone's making you, but because they're right. Elena felt her breath catch. When was the last time someone had done something for her simply because it was right? Jake tipped his hat. Good luck, Elena Martinez. I have a feeling Silver Creek is about to get a lot more interesting. As he walked away, Elena stood watching his retreating figure. Then she turned, climbed the steps, and knocked on Mrs. Henderson's door. Whatever happened next, she was ready to find out. Elena had been at Henderson's boarding house for 3 days when the world turned violent. Mrs. Henderson had welcomed her with the weary kindness of a woman who'd seen too many broken souls wash up on her doorstep. The boarding house was clean but worn, filled with the kind of folks who were either starting over or running from something, traveling salesmen, widowed miners, and now one rejected mail-order bride who scrubbed floors with the determination of someone trying to wash away her past. You work hard, Mrs. Henderson had observed on Elena's second morning, watching her attack the front porch with a scrub brush. Most girls your age would be crying into their pillows. Crying doesn't pay rent, Elena had replied, not looking up from her work. The routine was simple. Rise before dawn, prepare breakfast for the handful of boarders, clean rooms, help with laundry, assist with supper, then collapse into the small bed in the cramped room under the eaves that Mrs. Henderson had given her. It wasn't the life Elena had imagined when she'd boarded that train in San Antonio, but it was honest work, and after 3 days of keeping her hands busy, the sharp edges of her humiliation had begun to dull. She'd seen Jake Morrison twice, once when he'd tipped his hat to her from across the street, and once when he'd stopped by to deliver a load of firewood to Mrs. Henderson. Both times Elena had felt that same unexpected flutter in her chest, followed immediately by a stern reminder that she was in no position to be entertaining romantic notions about anyone, least of all a cowboy who'd probably forget her name by next week. On this particular morning, Elena was hanging laundry behind the boarding house when she heard the horses. 5 riders came down the main street at an easy lope, their spurs jingling softly in the morning air. Nothing unusual about that. Silver Creek saw plenty of cowboys coming and going, but something about these men made Elena pause in her work. They weren't local. She'd been in town long enough to recognize most of the regular faces, and these weren't among them. They rode with the loose, predatory grace of men who were comfortable with violence, their eyes scanning the street like wolves evaluating a flock of sheep. The lead rider was a tall man with a black beard and cold eyes. He wore a gun low on his hip and had the kind of smile that never reached above his mouth. When his gaze swept over the boarding house, it lingered on Elena for a moment longer than was polite. She turned back to her laundry, but the feeling of being watched crawled up her spine like a spider. Those men give you trouble. You come get me right away. Elena spun around to find Mrs. Henderson standing in the doorway, her weathered face creased with worry. You know them? I know their type. Drifters, gun hands, the kind that think a woman alone is fair game. Mrs. Henderson's jaw tightened. They'll probably move on by evening, but until they do, you stay close to the house. Elena nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that these particular wolves had caught a scent they liked. The afternoon passed quietly. Elena helped Mrs. Henderson prepare a pot roast for supper, swept the front porch, and mended a tear in one of the curtains. But every time she glanced out the window, she seemed to catch a sight of one of those riders, leaning against the hitching post outside the saloon, emerging from the general store, always watching. As evening approached, most of the boarders gathered in the small dining room for supper. There was Mr. Jameson, a traveling preacher with kind eyes and worn clothes, Mrs. Kowalski, a Polish widow heading west to live with her son, and Tom Bradley, a young man who worked at the telegraph office and blushed whenever Elena spoke to him. They were just finishing their meal when the knock came. It wasn't the polite rap of a customer seeking a room. It was the kind of knock that said the person on the other side wasn't planning to take no for an answer. Mrs. Henderson rose slowly, her hand moving instinctively to the shotgun she kept behind the front desk. Elena, you go upstairs. Mrs. Henderson, now! Elena obeyed, but she stopped at the top of the stairs where she could hear what was happening below. Evening, ma'am. The voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Name's Cole Jameson. My boys and I are looking for rooms for the night. I'm afraid we're full up, Mrs. Henderson replied, her voice steady. That's funny. Seems to me like you might have some space. We're not particular about accommodations. Elena crept to the window that overlooked the front porch. 4 men stood behind the one doing the talking, the same riders she'd seen that morning. In the fading light, they looked even more dangerous. I said we're full, Mrs. Henderson repeated. Now that's not very hospitable. Cole's voice hardened. Maybe you didn't understand. We're not asking. Elena heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. We saw that pretty little Mexican gal you got working for you, Cole continued. My boys have been on the trail for weeks. Could use some companionship. Elena's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could hear it downstairs. There's no one here by that description, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. Cole laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Ma'am, lying to a man with a gun ain't wise. We know she's here. Saw her hanging laundry this morning. Real pretty thing. Dark hair, nice figure. The kind of woman who knows how to show a man appreciation. Elena closed her eyes, fighting down the bile that rose in her throat. She thought about the window at the end of the hall, wondered if she could climb out onto the roof, escape into the night. But what about Mrs. Henderson? What about the other boarders? I'm going to count to 3, Cole said. Either you bring her down here, or we come up and get her ourselves. 1. Elena heard Mrs. Henderson's shotgun cock. 2. Elena made her decision. She couldn't let these people get hurt because of her. She took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt, and started down the stairs. I'm here, she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. What do you want? Cole's smile was everything Elena had feared it would be. Well, there she is, even prettier up close. Elena stepped into the parlor, positioning herself where she could see Mrs. Henderson. The older woman's face was pale but determined, the shotgun held steady in her hands. What do you want? Elena repeated. Just some company, sweetheart. You and my boys, we could have ourselves a real good time. I'm not interested. Cole's expression darkened. Wasn't really asking your preference, darling. Before Elena could react, 2 of Cole's men stepped into the parlor. Mrs. Henderson swung the shotgun toward them, but she wasn't fast enough. One of the men knocked the weapon from her hands while the other grabbed Elena's arm. Let her go, Mrs. Henderson shouted. Cole backhanded the older woman across the face, sending her stumbling backward. Elena screamed and tried to reach her, but the man holding her arm tightened his grip. Now, Cole said. No need for dramatics. We're just going to borrow your girl for the evening. Maybe longer, depending on how much we like her company. Elena felt panic rising in her throat. She looked around desperately for a weapon, an escape route, anything. That's when she saw Tom Bradley creeping down the stairs, a rifle in his hands. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Elena gave the slightest shake of her head. The young man was brave, but he was no match for 5 armed killers. If he tried to help, he'd just get himself killed. Please, Elena said, turning back to Cole. Take what you want from the boarding house, but leave these people alone. They haven't done anything to you. Cole stepped closer, close enough that Elena could smell the whiskey on his breath. Honey, you are what we want. The man holding Elena's arm started dragging her toward the door. She struggled, but he was too strong. Behind her, she could hear Mrs. Henderson pleading, Mr. Jameson praying, Mrs. Kowalski sobbing. They were almost to the door when the shooting started. The first shot came from somewhere outside, followed immediately by shouting. Cole spun toward the window, his gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. What the hell? The front door exploded inward, and Jake Morrison stepped through the wreckage like an avenging angel. His Colt 45 was already smoking, and his eyes had gone dead cold. Let her go, he said quietly. Cole's man released Elena's arm so fast she stumbled. The other outlaws were reaching for their weapons, but Jake was faster. His second shot took down the man who'd been holding Elena. His third shattered the hand of another outlaw reaching for his gun. Anyone else want to try their luck? Jake asked, his voice calm as still water. Cole raised his hand slowly. Easy there, friend. Just having a little fun. Funny thing about fun, Jake replied. Some folks have different ideas about what's entertaining. Elena realized she was shaking. The man Jake had shot was groaning on the floor, clutching his shoulder. The one with the shattered hand was screaming. The other 2 outlaws stood frozen, clearly calculating their chances and not liking the odds. "Elena?" Jake said without taking his eyes off Cole. "You hurt?" "No," she managed. "Mrs. Henderson?" "Just shaken up," the older woman replied, retrieving her shotgun. Jake nodded. "Cole Jameson, isn't it? Heard you were working the territory. Also heard there's paper on you in 3 states. Cole's smile was gone now. "You know my name, but I don't know yours. Jake Morrison. And you're leaving my town. Now. Your town? My town. My people. My woman." Jake's voice carried the finality of a gravestone. "Touch any of them again, and I'll kill you." Elena felt her breath catch. His woman. Cole looked at Jake, then at his wounded men, then back at Jake. Whatever he saw in the cowboy's eyes convinced him. "Boys, we're riding out." "What about Pete and Charlie?" one of them asked, gesturing to the wounded men. "They can ride or they can walk. Don't much care which." As the outlaws stumbled out the door, supporting their wounded companions, Cole paused at the threshold. "This isn't over, Morrison." "Yes, it is," Jake replied. "Next time I see you in Silver Creek, I won't bother with warnings." After they were gone, silence settled over the boarding house like dust after a windstorm. Elena sank into a chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. Mrs. Henderson began fussing over the cut on her lip where Cole had struck her. The other boarders emerged from their hiding places, shaken but unhurt. Jake holstered his gun and crossed to Elena. "You sure you're not hurt?" Elena looked up at him, taking in the concern in his storm-gray eyes, the gentle way he knelt beside her chair. "I'm fine, just scared." "Good thing to be scared of men like that." Jake's jaw tightened. "They won't be back, but I'm going to ask Sheriff Watson to keep an eye on things for a few days." "Thank you," Elena whispered. "If you hadn't come—" "I did come. That's all that matters." Elena felt tears threatening. "Why? Why did you help me?" Jake was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. "Because someone needs to look out for you, and I reckon that someone might as well be me." As the evening wound down and the boarding house slowly returned to normal, Elena found herself standing on the front porch, breathing in the cool night air. The attack had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, but something else was stirring in her chest, a feeling she wasn't quite ready to name. Jake Morrison had called her his woman, and for the first time since stepping off that train, Elena wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with storm clouds gathering over the mountains like dark promises. Elena woke before sunrise, as had become her habit, but this time it wasn't the roosters that pulled her from sleep. It was the memory of Jake Morrison's voice saying, "My woman," with such quiet certainty that it had echoed in her dreams. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs to start breakfast for the boarders. Mrs. Henderson was already in the kitchen, moving more slowly than usual. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, a purple reminder of how quickly safety could turn to terror. "How are you feeling?" Elena asked, taking the coffee pot from the older woman's hands. "Like I've been kicked by a mule, but I'll survive." Mrs. Henderson settled into a chair with a grateful sigh. "That was some shooting last night. Jake Morrison always could handle a gun, but I've never seen him move that fast." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. He said, he called me his woman." Mrs. Henderson's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement. "Did he now?" "I don't understand what it means. We barely know each other. Sometimes knowing takes time. Sometimes it happens in a heartbeat." Mrs. Henderson studied Elena's face. "Question is, how did it make you feel when he said it?" Elena busied herself with the coffee, not trusting herself to answer. The truth was, it had made her feel safe in a way she'd never experienced before. Not just protected, but claimed, wanted, valued. The morning passed quietly. Word of the previous night's events had spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, and several neighbors stopped by to check on them. Each visitor brought the same message. Jake Morrison was asking around town, making sure everyone knew that Elena Martinez was under his protection. Around noon, Elena was sweeping the front porch when she saw him riding down the main street. He sat his horse with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle, his dark hair catching the filtered sunlight beneath his hat brim. When he spotted her, he touched the brim of that hat in greeting, and Elena felt her pulse quicken. He dismounted at the hitching post and approached the porch, his spurs jingling softly. "Morning, Elena. How are you feeling today?" "Better, thank you. Mrs. Henderson's bruise looks worse, but she's tougher than old leather." Jake smiled at that, the expression transforming his weathered features. "She is that. Mind if I sit a spell?" Elena gestured to the wooden chairs on the porch. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the town go about its business. A wagon loaded with supplies rumbled past, heading toward one of the outlying ranches. Children chased a spotted dog down the street, their laughter carrying on the morning air. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Elena finally said, not looking at him. "What part?" "The part where you called me your woman." Jake was quiet for so long that Elena risked a glance at him. His expression was thoughtful, almost cautious. "Did it bother you?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I barely know you, and you barely know me. What would you like to know?" The question was so simple, so direct, that it caught Elena off guard. "Everything, I suppose." Jake leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance. "I was born on a ranch about 10 miles north of here. My pa died when I was 12, thrown from a horse. Ma lasted 3 more years before the consumption took her. I worked other people's ranches until I was old enough to buy my own land." "Do you have family? Brothers? Sisters?" "Had a brother, Sam. He died at Gettysburg." Jake's voice was matter-of-fact, but Elena caught the shadow that passed over his features. "After that, it was just me." Elena felt her heart clench. "I'm sorry. Life out here teaches you to take what comes and keep moving forward." Jake turned to look at her. "What about you?" "What's Elena Martinez's story?" Elena found herself talking more freely than she had since arriving in Silver Creek. She told him about her parents, about her father's death and the debts he'd left behind. She told him about the whispers in San Antonio, about the fear that had driven her to answer Thomas Mitchell's advertisement. "I thought if I could just get far enough away, I could become someone new," she admitted, "someone worthy of being chosen." "Elena," Jake's voice was gentle but firm, "you were already worthy. Mitchell was just too damn stupid to see it." The conviction in his voice made Elena's throat tight. "How can you be so sure? You've known me for 3 days." "Sometimes 3 days is enough. Sometimes 3 minutes is enough." Jake leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "My ma used to say you could judge a person's character by how they acted when things went wrong. Last night, you were willing to sacrifice yourself to protect people you barely knew. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Jake." "I know it's fast," he interrupted. "I know it probably seems crazy, but I'm 32 years old, Elena. I've been alone for a long time, and I've gotten pretty good at recognizing what matters when I see it." Before Elena could respond, the sound of approaching horses made them both turn. Sheriff Watson was riding up the street with 2 other men, one Elena recognized as the banker, the other as the town's only lawyer. Jake rose from his chair, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. "That's not a social call." Sheriff Watson dismounted and approached the porch, his expression grim. "Jake, Miss Martinez." "Sheriff," Jake replied. "What brings you by?" "I'm afraid I've got some bad news." Watson removed his hat, running nervous fingers through his graying hair. "Got a telegram from the territorial marshal this morning. Seems Cole Jameson and his boys hit the Patterson Ranch last night." Elena felt ice form in her stomach. "Are they—" "Bill Patterson's dead, so's his eldest boy. They took Mrs. Patterson and the 2 younger children." Watson's voice was flat, professional, but Elena could see the anger burning in his eyes. "Burned the house and barn. Killed the livestock." Jake's face had gone stone cold. "When?" "Best we can figure, around midnight. That's about 4 hours after they left town." Elena sank back into her chair, horror washing over her. "This is my fault. If they hadn't come here looking for me—" "No." Jake's voice cut across her self-recrimination like a blade. "This is their fault. Nobody else's. Jake's right, Sheriff Watson agreed. Men like Jameson don't need excuses for what they do. They just do it. The banker, a nervous man named Holbrook, stepped forward. Sheriff, with all due respect, maybe it would be better if Miss Martinez moved on. For everyone's safety. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Elena felt every eye on her, could practically hear the wheels turning in their heads. She was an outsider, a stranger who'd brought trouble to their peaceful community. That might be wise, she said quietly. I never intended… No. Jake's voice was flat, final. She's not going anywhere. Jake, be reasonable, Holbrook pressed. If her presence is putting people in danger, her presence isn't putting anyone in danger. Jameson is. Jake stepped closer to the banker, and Holbrook took an involuntary step backward. Elena Martinez is part of this community now. She's under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Sheriff Watson nodded slowly. Jake's right. We don't solve problems by running from them. He turned to Elena. Miss Martinez, I want you to stay close to town for the next few days. Jameson's still out there, and he's got a grudge now. After the men left, Elena and Jake sat in silence on the porch. The storm clouds had moved closer, and the first fat raindrops were beginning to fall. You shouldn't have done that, Elena said finally. Done what? Defended me. Made me your responsibility. The banker was right. I am putting people in danger. Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain begin to fall in earnest. You ever been in a bad storm, Elena? The kind where the wind howls and the rain comes down sideways? Yes. What do you do? Elena frowned. Find shelter. Wait it out. Exactly. You don't run out into the storm. You don't abandon your house. You hunker down and you weather it together. Jake turned to look at her. That's what communities do. That's what families do. Is that what we are? Family? Jake stood up and extended his hand to her. Come with me. Elena hesitated, then took his hand. He led her to the edge of the porch, where they stood watching the rain wash the dust from Silver Creek's main street. See that church? Jake pointed to a white wooden building with a simple bell tower. My parents were married there, and that schoolhouse? I learned to read in that building. That livery stable? That's where I bought my first horse with money I earned breaking broncs for old Mr. Henderson? Yes, the same Henderson whose widow runs this boarding house. Elena listened, beginning to understand. This isn't just a town to me, Elena. It's home. It's where my roots go down, deep into the soil. And yesterday, when I saw those men threatening you, I realized something. Jake's hand tightened around hers. I want your roots to go down here too. I want you to be part of this place. Part of my life. Part of everything that matters to me. Elena felt her breath catch. Jake, we've known each other for 3 days. 3 days. 3 years. 30 years. It doesn't matter. What matters is what I feel when I look at you. What matters is that when I thought about losing you last night, it felt like someone was tearing my heart out of my chest. The rain was falling harder now, creating a curtain that seemed to isolate them from the rest of the world. Elena looked up into Jake's storm-gray eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not the future she'd planned when she'd answered Thomas Mitchell's advertisement, but something better. Something real. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Jake's thumb brushed across her knuckles. But sometimes the best things in life are worth being scared for. Elena thought about Thomas Mitchell, about his cold rejection and cruel dismissal. She thought about Cole Jameson and his hungry eyes. She thought about all the ways the world could hurt a woman who dared to want more than survival. Then she looked at Jake Morrison, really looked at him. She saw the gentleness in his hands, the strength in his shoulders, the honesty in his eyes. She saw a man who'd stepped between her and danger without hesitation, who'd claimed her as his own not to possess her, but to protect her. What happens now? She asked. Jake smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Now we build something together. Take it one day at a time. See where it leads us. As if in response to his words, the rain began to ease. The clouds were breaking up, revealing patches of blue sky. Elena squeezed Jake's hand and felt something she hadn't felt since stepping off that train. Hope. All right, she said. Let's see where it leads. 3 weeks had passed since Cole Jameson's attack, and Silver Creek had settled back into its peaceful rhythm. The territorial marshal had arrived with a posse to hunt down the outlaw gang, but they'd vanished into the Badlands like smoke on the wind. The Patterson family had been found. Mrs. Patterson and the children traumatized but alive. The scars would heal, but the memory would linger. Elena had fallen into a comfortable routine at the boarding house, but increasingly her thoughts turned to the tall cowboy who visited every evening to share coffee and conversation on the front porch. Jake Morrison had become as much a part of her daily life as sunrise and sunset, and if she was honest with herself, just as essential. This particular evening found them walking along Silver Creek itself, the stream that gave the town its name. The water burbled softly over smooth stones, and cottonwood trees rustled in the gentle breeze. Jake had suggested the walk after supper, and Elena had found herself looking forward to this quiet time, away from the curious eyes of the townspeople. "You're awfully quiet tonight," Jake observed, his hands clasped behind his back as they strolled along the creek bank. Elena glanced at him sideways. "Just thinking?" "About what?" "About how different my life is now compared to what I expected when I got off that train." Elena paused to pick up a smooth stone, turning it over in her palm. "I thought I knew exactly how my story would go. Marriage to Thomas Mitchell, a ranch house, children, a predictable life. You sound like you miss that predictability." Elena considered this, then shook her head. "No, I don't think I do. It's just strange how life can take such unexpected turns." Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. "Do you regret it? Coming here, I mean." "No," Elena said immediately, then felt heat rise in her cheeks at how quickly she'd answered. "No, I don't regret it." Jake's smile was soft. "Good, because I can't imagine this place without you anymore." They resumed walking, the conversation flowing into more comfortable territory. Elena telling Jake about her childhood in San Antonio, her parents' bakery, the way her mother used to sing while she kneaded bread. Jake shared stories of growing up on the ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, the harsh lessons that prairie life taught young and old alike. "My father used to say that the land would teach you everything you needed to know about life," Jake said, picking up a flat stone and skipping it across the creek's surface. "Patience because nothing grows before its time. Strength because the wind and weather will test you, and humility because no matter how much you think you know, nature will surprise you." He sounds like a wise man. He was, and stubborn as a mule when he thought he was right. Jake's expression grew thoughtful. "I remember one year, there was a terrible drought. The creek dried up to barely a trickle. The grass turned brown, and the cattle were dying. The neighbors all said we should sell what stock we could and wait out the bad times." Elena listened, sensing this story had particular significance. But Pa refused. He said giving up was easy. Anybody could do that. He spent every penny we had digging wells, hauling water, keeping the ranch alive through sheer determination. Jake paused, staring out at the water. That winter the snows came heavy and early. Come spring we had water, grass, and the strongest herd in the county. The neighbors who'd sold out had to start over from nothing. "Your father was a gambler." "No, he was a man who knew the difference between a smart risk and a foolish one." Jake turned to look at Elena. "He taught me that sometimes the things worth having are the things worth fighting for, even when everyone else thinks you're crazy." Elena felt her pulse quicken. There was something in Jake's tone, in the way he was looking at her, that suggested this story wasn't just about cattle and drought. "Jake?" "Elena, there's something I need to tell you." Jake's voice was serious now, almost formal. "Something about why I never married before now." Elena felt her stomach flutter with nerves. "You don't owe me any explanations." "Maybe not, but I want to give you one anyway." Jake led her to a fallen log beside the creek, and they sat down side by side. "Her name was Catherine Henley. We grew up together, went to the same church, had the same dreams about building a life on the frontier." Elena tried to keep her expression neutral, but jealousy was an unfamiliar and unwelcome emotion. "I was 22 when I asked her father for permission to marry her. He said yes. She said yes, and I thought I had my whole future figured out. Jake's voice was matter-of-fact, but Elena could hear the old pain underneath. The wedding was set for June. I'd saved enough money to buy the riverside property, had plans drawn up for the house we'd build together. What happened? 2 weeks before the wedding, Catherine came to see me, said she'd been having second thoughts that maybe she wasn't ready for marriage after all. She wanted to see more of the world before settling down. Elena felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry. At first I thought it was just wedding nerves. I told her we could wait, postpone things until she felt more certain. But she said no, it wasn't about timing. She said she'd realized she didn't love me the way a wife should love a husband. The pain in Jake's voice was carefully controlled, but Elena could hear it nonetheless. That must have been devastating. It was, but that wasn't the worst part. Jake picked up a twig and began breaking it into small pieces. 3 months later, Catherine married Robert Sinclair, a traveling merchant from Denver. Turned out she'd been corresponding with him for months before our wedding was supposed to happen. Elena's breath caught. She was in love with someone else. The whole time, apparently. She just didn't have the courage to tell me until the last minute. Jake tossed the broken twig into the creek and watched it float away. I found out later that half the town knew about her letters to Sinclair. People felt sorry for me. Poor Jake Morrison, the fool who couldn't see what was right in front of his face. Elena felt anger flare in her chest, not at Jake, but for him. She should have been honest with you from the beginning. Maybe, or maybe she was trying to do what everyone expected her to do, just like I was. Jake turned to face Elena fully. The point is, after Catherine left, I decided I was done with love. Done with trusting people who said one thing, but meant another. I built my walls high and thick, and I told myself I was better off alone. But you're telling me this now. Why? Jake reached for Elena's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Because I need you to understand that what I feel for you isn't some rebound from an old heartbreak. It's not me trying to fill a Catherine-shaped hole in my life. What I feel for you is completely different from anything I felt for her. Elena's heart was racing now. How is it different? With Catherine, everything felt planned, expected, like we were following a script that someone else had written for us. Jake's thumb traced circles on Elena's palm. With you, it feels real, unexpected, like I'm finally awake after years of sleepwalking. Elena stared down at their joined hands, overwhelmed by the intensity of his words. Jake, I need to tell you something too. What is it? Elena took a deep breath. I was never in love with Thomas Mitchell. I thought I was, or I told myself I was. But looking back, I think I was just in love with the idea of being chosen, of mattering to someone. Jake was quiet, waiting for her to continue. When I got his letters, I felt important for the first time in my life. Someone wanted me, Elena Martinez, the girl whose father died in debt and whose future looked so bleak that the neighbors whispered about it over their fences. Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke. But it wasn't really about Thomas. It was about escape, about becoming someone new. And now? Elena looked up to meet Jake's eyes. Now I realize I didn't need to become someone new. I just needed to find someone who could see who I already was. Jake's smile was slow and warm. And who are you, Elena Martinez? I'm someone who's tired of being afraid, someone who's ready to stop running from the past and start building a future. Elena squeezed his hand. Someone who's falling in love with a stubborn cowboy who thinks he can protect the whole world. Jake's eyes widened. Elena, I love you, Jake Morrison. I love your gentle hands and your fierce heart. I love the way you make me feel safe and brave at the same time. I love that you see strength in me that I didn't even know I had. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if he was trying to memorize every detail. Then slowly he raised his free hand to cup her cheek. I love you too, he said simply, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. The kiss that followed was soft and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, Elena felt as if the world had shifted on its axis, not in the devastating way it had when Thomas Mitchell rejected her, but in a way that felt like coming home. They sat by the creek until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and sharing dreams. Jake told her about his ranch, about the house he wanted to build, about the children he hoped to have someday. Elena talked about her desire to start a school in Silver Creek, about the garden she wanted to plant, about the life she could finally see stretching out before her. As they walked back toward town, hand in hand under the starlight, Elena realized that for the first time since her father's death, she wasn't afraid of the future. She had found her place, her purpose, and most importantly, her person. "Jake," she said as they reached the boarding house. "Yeah? When you were telling me about your father and the drought, you said he knew the difference between a smart risk and a foolish one." Jake nodded. Elena stood on her tiptoes and kissed him softly. "What kind of risk am I?" Jake's smile was answer enough, but he said the words anyway. "The smartest one I've ever taken." As Elena climbed the stairs to her small room under the eaves, she carried with her the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new challenges, and most importantly, the chance to continue building something beautiful with the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early October, when the aspen trees were turning gold and the air carried the first hint of winter's approach. Elena was helping Mrs. Henderson preserve the last of the season's apples when Tom Bradley from the telegraph office knocked on the boarding house door. "Special delivery for Miss Elena Martinez," he announced, holding out an official-looking envelope with a nervous smile. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and accepted the letter, her heart sinking when she recognized the return address. Mitchell Ranch, Silver Creek territory. Thomas Mitchell had finally decided to communicate with her directly. "Thank you, Tom," she managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. After Tom left, Elena stood in the kitchen holding the unopened letter like it might burst into flames. Mrs. Henderson glanced up from her apple peeling, took one look at Elena's face, and set down her knife. "Bad news?" the older woman asked gently. "I don't know yet." Elena's fingers trembled slightly as she broke the wax seal and unfolded the single sheet of expensive paper inside. The letter was brief and to the point, written in Thomas Mitchell's familiar, precise handwriting. "Miss Martinez, I have reconsidered our previous arrangement. Recent events have made me realize that I acted hastily in my initial decision. If you are still amenable to the original terms of our correspondence, I would be pleased to proceed with our planned union. I understand that my previous actions may have caused you some distress, for which I apologize. However, I believe we can put that unfortunate misunderstanding behind us and move forward with our mutual benefit in mind. Please respond at your earliest convenience if you wish to honor our original agreement. Respectfully yours, Thomas Mitchell." Elena read the letter twice, then a third time, trying to process what she was seeing. Thomas Mitchell, the man who had rejected her so cruelly and publicly just 2 months ago, was now asking her to marry him as if nothing had happened. "What does it say, dear?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice filled with concern. Elena handed her the letter without a word. As Mrs. Henderson read, her eyebrows climbed steadily higher. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," the older woman muttered. "The nerve of that man." "I don't understand," Elena said, sinking into a kitchen chair. "Why now?" "What's changed?" Mrs. Henderson folded the letter carefully and handed it back. "Honey, I suspect Thomas Mitchell has had time to think about what he gave up. Word of how Jake Morrison claimed you has probably reached every ranch within 50 miles. Men like Mitchell don't like being shown up." Elena felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "You think this is about Jake?" "I think this is about pride and possession. Thomas Mitchell never saw you as a person, Elena. He saw you as property he could accept or reject at will. Now that another man values that property, suddenly he's interested again." The truth of Mrs. Henderson's words hit Elena like a physical blow. She thought about the cold dismissal she'd received from Mitchell's lawyer, the humiliation of being rejected before she'd even had a chance to meet the man she'd traveled so far to marry. Now, after she'd finally found happiness, after she'd built a new life and fallen in love with a good man, Thomas Mitchell wanted her back. "What are you going to do?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. Before Elena could answer, the kitchen door opened and Jake walked in, as had become his habit during his lunch breaks from ranch work. He took one look at Elena's pale face and Mrs. Henderson's worried expression and immediately crossed to Elena's side. "What's wrong?" he asked, his hands settling protectively on Elena's shoulder. Elena wordlessly handed him the letter. She watched Jake's face as he read, saw his jaw tighten and his eyes go hard as flint. "Son of a bitch, huh?" he said quietly, then immediately apologized to Mrs. Henderson for his language. "No apology necessary," the older woman replied crisply. "I was thinking the same thing, just in more colorful terms." Jake refolded the letter and set it on the table with deliberate care. "What do you want to do, Elena?" The question was simple, but Elena heard the deeper concern underneath it. Jake was asking not just about her response to Mitchell's letter, but about her feelings, her desires, her commitment to the life they'd been building together. "I want to burn this letter and pretend I never received it," Elena said honestly. "But I don't think it's going to be that simple." Jake pulled out a chair and sat down beside her, taking her hands in his work-roughened ones. "Mitchell's not going to give up easily. Men like him don't like being told no, especially not by someone they consider beneath them." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Thomas Mitchell is one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. He's used to getting what he wants, when he wants it. The fact that you're happy with someone else isn't going to matter to him." Elena felt fear creep up her spine. "You think he'll make trouble?" "I think he'll try." Jake's voice was calm, but Elena could see the steel underneath. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Mrs. Henderson, who had been quietly listening to their conversation, suddenly spoke up. "You could get married." Both Elena and Jake turned to stare at her. "Think about it," the older woman continued, warming to her theme. "If Elena is already married, Mitchell can't very well claim she's still available for his convenience." Elena felt her cheeks burn. "Mrs. Henderson, Jake and I haven't even discussed—" "Haven't we?" Jake interrupted gently. "Elena, we've talked about building a life together, about the house I want to build, about the children we might have someday. What did you think that was leading to?" Elena looked into Jake's storm-gray eyes and felt her heart race. I hoped, but I didn't want to assume." Jake smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Elena Martinez, I've been planning to ask you to marry me since the night I called you my woman. I was just waiting for the right moment." "And you think this is the right moment?" Elena gestured to Mitchell's letter. "I think the right moment is whenever we decide it is." Jake's hands tightened around hers. "But I won't lie to you. Having Thomas Mitchell sniffing around makes me want to stake my claim a little more urgently than I might have otherwise." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "Is that why you want to marry me? To stake your claim?" Jake's expression grew serious. "Elena, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued, "I want to marry you because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because when I think about growing old, I want to grow old beside you." His voice softened. "Mitchell's letter doesn't change any of that. It just makes me want to protect what we have." Elena felt the last of her fears melt away. "Then yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want." Elena smiled through her tears. "I love you, Jake Morrison, and I want to be your wife." Jake's answering smile was brilliant. He stood up, pulling Elena with him, and spun her around the kitchen until Mrs. Henderson threatened to throw apple peels at both of them. "When?" he asked, setting Elena back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "How about Saturday?" Mrs. Henderson suggested. "That gives us time to plan a proper ceremony, but not so much time that Mitchell can cause trouble." Elena looked at Jake, who nodded enthusiastically. "Saturday it is." The rest of the week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Word of the engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, and the entire community seemed determined to make Elena and Jake's wedding a celebration to remember. Mrs. Henderson organized the women to prepare food for the reception. The men pitched in to decorate the church and ensure there would be music for dancing afterward. Elena found herself overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. These people, who had been strangers to her just 2 months ago, now treated her like family. They were genuinely happy for her happiness, and it filled her heart in ways she hadn't expected. On Friday evening, as Elena was trying on the simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her alter, there was a knock at the boarding house door. Mrs. Henderson went to answer it and returned with a troubled expression. "Elena, dear, you have a visitor." Elena's blood ran cold. "Thomas Mitchell?" "I'm afraid so. He's waiting in the parlor." Elena took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt, and walked downstairs to face the man who had shaped so much of her recent past. Thomas Mitchell stood by the window, his back to the room, but she would have recognized his tall, rigid posture anywhere. "Mr. Mitchell," she said formally. He turned, and Elena was struck by how different he looked from the man in the photograph he'd sent. He was handsome enough, with dark hair and sharp features, but there was something cold in his eyes, something calculating that made her skin crawl. "Miss Martinez," he bowed slightly. "You look well." "Thank you. I understand you wanted to speak with me." Mitchell's gaze swept over her appraisingly, and Elena had to resist the urge to cross her arms over her chest. "I assume you received my letter." "I did. And your response?" Elena lifted her chin. "I'm getting married tomorrow, Mr. Mitchell, to Jake Morrison." Something flickered in Mitchell's eyes. Anger, perhaps, or wounded pride. "I see. How precipitous of you." "Not precipitous. Right." Mitchell moved closer, and Elena forced herself to stand her ground. "Miss Martinez, I think you may be making a mistake. Morrison is a simple cowboy with a small ranch and modest prospects. I, on the other hand, can offer you comfort, security, social standing. I'm not interested in what you can offer me, Mr. Mitchell. Perhaps you should reconsider. The frontier can be a harsh place for a woman without proper protection." His voice carried a subtle threat that made Elena's spine stiffen. "I have all the protection I need." "Do you?" Mitchell's smile was cold. "Morrison's ranch is rather isolated, isn't it? Accidents happen out there. Men get hurt, disappear sometimes." Elena felt ice form in her veins. "Are you threatening Jake?" "I'm simply pointing out the realities of frontier life. A woman needs to think carefully about her choices." Before Elena could respond, she heard the familiar sound of Jake's spurs on the front porch. A moment later, he walked into the parlor, took one look at the tableau before him, and stepped protectively to Elena's side. "Mitchell," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Morrison." Mitchell's tone was equally cold. "Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials. I was just telling Miss Martinez how unexpected the news was. The only thing unexpected about it is that it took me this long to ask her." Jake's arm slipped around Elena's waist. "Now, I believe you were just leaving." Mitchell's facade of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing the ugly anger underneath. "This isn't over, Morrison." "Yes, it is," Jake replied. "As of tomorrow, Elena will be my wife. That makes her my business and my responsibility. You'll stay away from her, and you'll stay away from me. Otherwise, we'll have a problem." Mitchell straightened his coat and headed for the door. "We'll see about that." After he left, Elena sagged against Jake, the tension finally leaving her body. "He threatened you," she whispered. "I know, but he won't do anything. Men like Mitchell are all bluster when they're faced with real opposition." Jake tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. "You still want to marry me tomorrow?" Elena thought about the alternatives, a life of comfort and security with a man who saw her as property, or a life of love and partnership with a man who would protect her with his life. It wasn't really a choice at all. "More than ever," she said, and meant every word. Elena's wedding day dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the boarding house windows like liquid gold. She woke before sunrise, her heart racing with anticipation and nervous energy. Today, she would become Mrs. Jake Morrison. Today, her new life would truly begin. Mrs. Henderson had insisted on preparing a special breakfast, and the kitchen filled with the warm scents of fresh bread, coffee, and bacon. But Elena found herself too excited to eat more than a few bites. "You need to keep your strength up," Mrs. Henderson chided gently, pressing a cup of coffee into Elena's hands. "It's going to be a long, wonderful day." As the morning progressed, the boarding house became a hive of activity. Mary Jenkins arrived with a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers she'd gathered from the meadows outside town. Mrs. Kowalski contributed a beautiful lace handkerchief that had belonged to her grandmother. Even stern Mr. Jameson, the traveling preacher, offered his blessing and a small leather-bound Bible as a wedding gift. Elena felt overwhelmed by the kindness of these people who had welcomed her as family. 2 months ago, she had been a stranger with nothing but a rejected dream. Now she was surrounded by love and preparing to marry the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Time to get you dressed, Mrs. Henderson announced as the church bells chimed 11 o'clock. The wedding dress was simple but beautiful, white cotton with tiny pearl buttons and delicate embroidery that Mrs. Henderson had added herself. It had belonged to the older woman's daughter, who had died young from fever, and Elena felt honored to wear it. As Mrs. Henderson helped her with the buttons, Elena caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman looking back at her seemed transformed, not just by the dress, but by something deeper. There was a confidence in her eyes, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there when she'd first stepped off the train in Silver Creek. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Henderson said softly, adjusting the simple veil that had also belonged to her daughter. "Jake Morrison is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Elena replied, meaning every word. They were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Elena," Mary Jenkins called, "are you ready?" "Jake's at the church, and he looks like he might wear a hole in the floor from pacing." Elena laughed, feeling some of her nervous energy transform into pure joy. "I'm ready." The walk to the church should have taken 5 minutes, but it seemed like half the town had turned out to see the bride. People lined the boardwalks, calling out congratulations and good wishes. Children threw flower petals, and someone had even brought a fiddle to play a wedding march. Elena felt tears of happiness prick at her eyes. This was what she had dreamed of. Not just a wedding, but a community celebration, a sense of belonging that went deeper than any legal document or ceremony. The church itself was packed. Cowboys sat next to shopkeepers, ranchers' wives next to saloon girls who had dressed in their finest for the occasion. At the front of the church, Pastor Williams waited with his Bible open, smiling broadly, and beside him stood Jake Morrison. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Jake wore a black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and made his storm gray eyes seem even more intense. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he held his hat respectfully in his hands. But it was the expression on his face when he saw her that made Elena's heart skip. Pure love and wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. As Elena walked down the aisle, she felt the weight of every decision that had brought her to this moment. Thomas Mitchell's rejection, which had seemed like the end of the world, now felt like divine providence. If he hadn't turned her away, she never would have found Jake. She never would have discovered what real love felt like. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began when Elena reached the altar, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Jake Morrison and Elena Martinez in holy matrimony." The ceremony proceeded with traditional vows, but when it came time for them to speak their own words to each other, Jake took Elena's hands in his and spoke from the heart. "Elena, when you stepped off that train 2 months ago, I had no idea my life was about to change forever. You've brought light into places I didn't even know were dark. You've shown me what courage looks like, what grace means, what it feels like to love someone more than your own life." His voice was steady, but Elena could see the emotion in his eyes. "I promise to protect you, to cherish you, to stand beside you through whatever storms may come. I promise to love you for all the days of my life." Elena's own voice trembled slightly as she responded. "Jake, you saved me in every way a person can be saved. You saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You offered me not just love, but partnership, not just protection, but respect." She squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to stand with you in joy and sorrow, to love you with my whole heart for as long as we both shall live. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana," Pastor Williams declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake's kiss was gentle but thorough, a promise sealed before God and community. The church erupted in cheers and applause, and Elena felt as if her heart might burst from pure happiness. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Elena caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the back of the church. Thomas Mitchell watched with cold eyes, his expression unreadable. Elena felt Jake tense beside her, but she simply lifted her chin and looked straight ahead. Mitchell had lost any power over her the moment she'd chosen love over security, partnership over possession. The reception was held in the church hall, with tables groaning under the weight of food that the townspeople had contributed. There was dancing and laughter, speeches and toasts. Elena danced with Jake, with Mr. Jameson, with Sheriff Watson, and with every man present who wanted to honor the new bride. As the evening wound down and the guests began to drift home, Elena found herself on the church steps with Jake, looking out over Silver Creek under the starlight. Tomorrow she would move to his ranch and begin her new life as a wife. Tonight she just wanted to savor this perfect moment. "Any regrets?" Jake asked, echoing the question that had become something of a tradition between them. Elena thought about Thomas Mitchell's cold proposal, about the life of comfort and status she could have had. Then she looked at her husband, really looked at him. She saw the man who had defended her honor, who had claimed her as his own not to possess her, but to protect her, who had shown her what it meant to be valued for who she truly was. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one." Jake's smile was warm enough to chase away the autumn chill. "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have reason for any." As they walked hand in hand toward their future, toward the ranch that would become their home, toward the children they would raise, toward the life they would build together, Elena reflected on the strange turns that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Silver Creek as a rejected mail-order bride, broken and humiliated. She was leaving as a cherished wife, valued and loved. Sometimes Elena thought as Jake helped her into the wagon that would carry them to their new home, the worst rejections really do lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you truly belong. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person meant to save you turns out to be the person you never saw coming. The quiet cowboy with gentle hands who finds you when you're broken and loves you not in spite of your wounds, but because of the strength it took to survive them. 3 months later, Elena stood in the garden behind the house Jake had built for her, watching the first green shoots of spring push through the Montana soil. Her hand rested on her still flat belly, where their first child was just beginning to grow. Jake was in the barn, tending to a mare about to foal, his voice carrying on the evening air as he spoke softly to the nervous animal. Thomas Mitchell had left Silver Creek shortly after the wedding, selling his ranch to a family from back east and disappearing into whatever hole men like him crawled into when their pride was wounded. Elena occasionally wondered what had become of him, but not often. Her life was too full of good things to waste time on regrets or might-have-beens. "Elena," Jake called from the barn, "you might want to come see this." Elena walked across the yard, her skirts swishing through the new grass. Inside the barn, the mare was lying on her side, a tiny foal already standing on wobbly legs beside her. Its coat was the color of dark chocolate, and it had a perfect white star on its forehead. "She's beautiful," Elena breathed. "She is," Jake agreed, but he was looking at Elena when he said it. "Have I told you today that I love you?" Elena smiled, leaning into her husband's embrace. "Only about a dozen times, but I don't mind hearing it again. I love you, Elena Morrison. More than yesterday, less than tomorrow." As they stood together in the doorway of their barn, watching new life take its first tentative steps into the world, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She had traveled 2,000 miles to find love, only to discover that love had been waiting for her all along, not in the man who had summoned her across a continent, but in the one who had seen her worth when she was broken and chosen to love her anyway. This was her story now, not the rejected mail-order bride, but the cherished wife, not the woman who had been cast aside, but the woman who had been chosen, not the ending she had planned, but the beginning she had never dared to dream. And so, across these unforgiving lands, another tale drifts away with the wind. If this story of quiet courage and stubborn hope touched you in any way, if you found yourself believing that the worst rejections can lead to the most beautiful beginnings, then leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Elena's place? Would you have had the courage to start over when everything fell apart? Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories, because out here in the frontier, there are still so many truths left to tell. Each one carved from pain, hope, and the dust of dreams that refuse to die. Until next time, remember that sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you truly belong.